Hey everybody, welcome to today's broadcast. We have with us two guests. We have Rosemary Ford. She is our Director of Interpreter Services here at St. Joseph Hospital, and also a member of our Diversity and Inclusion Council. And we also have Content. And Ronnie is a longtime friend of mine who is joining us to have a discussion about some of the barriers and challenges of folks in the queer, gay, LGBTQ community when accessing healthcare, and certainly when accessing healthcare, maybe in a Catholic hospital, Catholic health system. So today we brought Ronnie and Rosemary here to help us recognize that this June is National Pride Month, and we want to have a discussion with Ronnie about some of his experiences as a gay Black man, experiencing Catholic healthcare, experiencing healthcare in general, and what his thoughts and feelings are about that. So, Ronnie, thank you again for joining us. Rosemary, thank you again for joining us. And we're going to jump right in here. So, we have a few questions we want to ask Ronnie, and I know Ronnie's going to kind of give us his thoughts and opinions on these things. So I'm going to turn it over to Rosemary to kind of lead the question and answer portion of this broadcast.
Thanks, Tim. So Ronnie, when accessing healthcare, what are some of the barriers that you've experienced as a patient who identifies as queer?
Thank you, Rosemary. Great question, I might add. I would definitely say one of the biggest parts when accessing healthcare as an individual identifying as queer is the non-discriminatory policies and making sure that doctors as well as the staff are aware of my gender identity, my gender expression. And even when first going into either a Catholic hospital or a hospital in general, one of the questions that are asked are like, how do you identify? Are you this? Are you that? And already at the forefront, it's already out there that I am different, I am this, and therefore judgment and criticism, can already start building. And so when trying to match with like a specific doctor, and it's always like one of those secondary questions of, will this doctor accept me, or will this whole staff accept me? And that's one of the things that, as being a queer Black person, like I already have to deal with, hey, is this person like okay with person of color? Now on top of that, I have to add my gender expression, my gender identity as part of the access to healthcare that some of us do fear that we're not fully accepted. And that's why we kind of wait to go to healthcare, we wait to go to the hospital because we're not sure how we're going to be fully accepted.
Yeah, that's such a unique challenge. I think most of us don't necessarily consider. We think of just calling our PCP or calling the doctor's office saying, hey, I want to see this guy or that guy or whoever. Mm-hmm. But you're right. It's a much different thought process that you might have to go through of, will this person, especially maybe in a Catholic healthcare system, and not to say that it's necessarily going to happen or that it's true. And we certainly, I think we want everyone to feel comfortable, but there's that perception out there that, what if because it's a Catholic system, what if that means they won't accept me? Mm-hmm. And I think we're trying to kind of break down that perception as well. Because I think we are a very accepting organization. And obviously we're only speaking for St. Joe's, but I can see how that would be such a challenge for you. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thank you for that very candid answer.
Thank you.
All right, so back to Rosemary. Why don't you we'll continue on and you can ask kind of the next question.
Sure. So Ronnie, following up from the last question, what can healthcare systems do to be more inclusive to the LGBTQ plus community?
I would definitely say some of the processes that are already up and coming. Number one, I would definitely just say is to train your employees to be more gender neutral. Obviously in a day and age where labels mean everything, and as much as we don't want labels, it is an important part, especially within the community, to know how you self-express yourself, how you identify. And so teaching even the basic of gender neutrality and calling them as rather than he or she when they first present themselves. So it's always go by the phrase, don't judge a book by its cover. You may see a man that presents as man, but on the inside, you don't know how they identify or what they present themselves. The same thing with a woman. They could be very femme presenting or woman presenting. Yet at the end of the day, until you start talking to them and maybe ask, oh, what are your pronouns? Then you would find out deeper that those are some of the things that we look for in kind of like a nice way, that it doesn't always have to be at the forefront and that it maybe is. But for the main part, it's just stop the assumptions or like being more aware of that. You're not just going to meet the everyday straight white person that comes into a hospital, that you're going to have all different colors under the rainbow, and that different people have different issues, and that being aware of those issues and identifying them is what's going to help bring more, I feel, LGBT community people to hospitals if they know they're cared for and know what certain services are provided.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think even just the gender pronouns, I think that's a big challenge. I mean, it's certainly not just for hospitals. I think for a lot of folks in the community, you're just getting used to asking those things, right? And just and using the correct gender pronoun, and finding out what the person would prefer. So I think that's definitely a challenge, and I think it's something that our hospital and our community needs to be more focused on, for sure.
Exactly. Agreed.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Rosemary, go ahead.
So Ronnie, you're studying to be an ASL interpreter, which is awesome. I'm an ASL interpreter as well, so welcome to the community. And
Thank you.
You're welcome. So barriers are heightened for individuals who identify as LGBTQ and deaf. That being said, having a presence of an ASL interpreter who identifies as part of the LGBTQ plus community can greatly benefit someone who is deaf and identifies as part of that community as well. What are some pros, cons, benefits to having an interpreter part of the LGBTQ community interpreting for someone who identifies compared to someone who does not?
Oof. Good question. That's definitely a long one, but I guess to build it up a little bit, you already know yourself that being an ASL interpreter, that's already step one. You're already someone that's being the bridge of communication between the deaf and hearing community. So being someone to stand in that place and take on that role is already beneficial and a pro enough. Adding on top of that, and as I kind of explained with the intersection, you add the individual that's able to sign, okay, take that a step further, take the certain communities that are deaf as well. So you said LGBT. So having a interpreter that's part of the LGBT community can already add that comfort and that relaxation of, oh, okay, I have my interpreter here, but also they identify as queer, gay, or trans, and that already adds an extra layer onto the whole comfortability, and that I can be my open self and I don't have to feel like I'm hiding. And so with that, with myself, I've always been told, especially being a male interpreter, that'll be greatly useful because a lot of the ASL interpreting community is female, and that's not a problem. It's just based on where you are. There's not always that access to a male interpreter or an interpreter that you specifically need. That if it's a woman interpreter that's also part of the LGBT, or a male interpreter that's part of the LGBT, but then you add those different layers on top. Oh, I prefer someone that's Hispanic, or someone that's of a color, or I prefer someone that's had experience in certain communities. That way it makes it more comfortable for them to be able to express themselves, as I said, and not have so many frustrations that they already feel being an oppressed community. And compared to those that may not hold those titles, but don't have those specific experiences, it is hard to connect on that kind of level when you already have this community that has been misunderstood and ostracized and just looked down for many years. And so when you try to accommodate them and you try to put yourself forward and try to be on the same level playing field, it does help them to feel more open, feel more comfortable as more than just a deaf community, but then as an LGBT on top of that as well.
Great. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you.
So Ronnie, we see nationally that there's more movement towards recognizing and reconciling the racial disparities that exist in healthcare and the disparities that the LGBTQ plus community faces. Why is having a culturally competent care approach beneficial and crucial for healthcare providers when working with this marginalized population?
Another great question. I would definitely say that, kind of backtracking to what we said before, how can you implement processes? Just being aware is where it starts, in acknowledging the fact that we are all different. We all come with our own set of different disabilities, diseases that we may need services for, or just overall different personality types. And it's that awareness that will definitely help not only doctors, but people as a general to be more open and see that it is healthcare, that we're all here just to get that broken bone fixed or recover from pneumonia. It's healthcare that affects us all, yes, in different ways, but at the end of the day, healthcare is there to make us better as a person. And having those disparities, both racially and community-based, it is hard. And so there are certain, how do I explain it? There are certain diseases, like I said, or certain experiences that LGBT people have, and that it will heighten some of the unfortunate complications with it. So we have STDs, the AIDS pandemic within the LGBT community, that now we are getting better, so thank God for that. But at the same time, it's those different disparities that are looked at as, oh, you're different, it's gonna be harder to treat you, or you're not gonna make it, and so therefore we'll put our efforts towards somebody else. And so I guess with that, in having certain health issues affect the LGBT community, and the fact that, especially within the community, not everybody lives a monogamous life. Like, you could have, for lack of a better word, people that have more promiscuous lives, or lives that aren't always as straight and normal. And so when addressing that with healthcare, it is important to be aware that this person could have a different background than myself, or that person over in that chair. And so when certain problems of the LGBT community come up, it is important to know, it's like, okay, so this person has this, but then they're also LGBT, or they're also trans, so this could also affect it. And making those small connections is all that it takes to be able to provide the best services and best healthcare that you can, when you know these different difficulties and disparities and are more aware of it as an individual and as an organization.
And that's a really great point. I mean, I would think that if you have an environment that you feel that the healthcare providers are more of an ally, it really creates a more welcoming environment, and folks would be more apt to go and access services where one feels welcome and understood, and having a culturally competent approach.
Agreed. Yes.
Great.
So Ronnie, like other minority groups, the LGBTQ plus community is often misunderstood, underrepresented, overlooked in the healthcare system. How can healthcare systems partner with the LGBTQ plus community to address disparities and inequities?
I would definitely say just start locally and grow more. So I guess the quote you could think is, think globally, but act locally. You start with your own hometown, your own home city, and bridge out from there. So St. Joseph's Hospital, being in the community it's in, you branch out and find different LGBT communities that would maybe be landlines. So like, especially in New Hampshire here with Manchester, we have the Queen City Pride Committee and the nonprofit, excuse me. And so them already putting on Pride and having different Pride events, LGBT friendly events. So having them and their connections can definitely help out. Also with PFLAG and other New Hampshire based community organizations, you could reach out to different LGBT youth centers, and that would have them, ranting here, hold on, would have different outreaches for different communities around New Hampshire. So like I said, PFLAG and Queen City Pride, and then finding those smaller local organizations that help branch out, and that way you can spread throughout all of New England, or reach out to different other organizations, whether Catholic or any sort of healthcare organization, to better partner. And having more of those open-minded and fair questions to be able to visit, meet the doctor, having LGBT clinics to make themselves available and educate people to these different disparities and these different healthcare issues that some of us as a community can face. I'm looking at my notes for a second. Yeah, so just again, being that open-minded and awareness to reach out to those different organizations, however hard they may be, but it's just a click of a button away to find the organizations within your own community that you could help build and prosper and help build this connection between the healthcare and LGBT community.
And that's great advice. If there's one thing I've learned being part of a variety of diversity and inclusion committees and council, both with the City of Nashua and at St. Joe's, is when working with vulnerable populations, folks who are there as allies should not be making the decisions, but working with the community that you're trying to help and promote to see what are the needs. And the grassroots approach is the best approach.
Agreed, very much so.
So Rosemary, since you are the director of our interpreter services program here at St. Joseph Hospital, as well as the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, could you tell us a little bit about what St. Joseph Hospital is doing to promote an inclusive environment for all members of our community, regardless of gender or identity? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure, Tim. I've been a member of our committee for over 10 years, and I've been the chair for the past 2 years. And one thing that we've changed in the past few years is we've started to open up the committee to the community. So I'm really proud that we have local organizations who have representatives that are a part of our council. And the reason for that is in order for us to make an impact in the community and to really enhance services for our diverse patient population, we need to hear from the people. What is going on locally? Like Ronnie said, you need to think globally and act locally to start. And through these community connections, we've been able to bring fantastic trainings to our staff and community that have been well attended from other healthcare systems, as well as patients, families, and friends. For example, we were blessed to have Dr. Porter come, and she has been doing extensive research and studying on LGBTQ senior citizens. We were granted a license for Gen Silent, and were able to view that documentary film. And also have a panel discussion after, which was really insightful of how it is to be LGBTQ but a senior citizen, and how people are affected much differently because these are seniors. And when they did come out, if they did, years ago, it wasn't nearly as accepting as it is now. Not that I'm implying that it's easy now, but it was quite different then, and how people are affected by relationships with family and isolation and assisted living. It was such a really impactful event that I'm so proud that we were able to provide to the community. We also just recently had a presenter from UNH, and this presentation was on LGBTQ plus cultural competent care, specifically for people in a healthcare setting, sharing best practices, inclusive language, recommendations on policy changes, form changes, to be more inclusive of our diverse population, and how to make our environment a more welcoming one. Because the goal here is to make things accessible for all. We all have a right to equal access to health care and quality health care, regardless of what our background is, which is key. Being part of interpreter services, anyone who knows me knows that I'm very passionate about language access. And we have patients that we see who do identify as LGBTQ+, they're either deaf and hard of hearing, or they speak a language other than English. And part of the training that we provide our staff interpreters who are certified and qualified in a healthcare setting is to provide ongoing trainings and education on how to best meet the needs of our LGBTQ patients when interpreting for them. So thanks for asking that question, Tim.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Rosemary, for joining us today. I think we all learned a lot, certainly about, not only, St. Joseph Hospital's role in this process in treating folks from the LGBTQ community, but also, the perceptions and the misperceptions perhaps that are out there in regards to healthcare and how it affects these folks. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for telling us your story. It was very enlightening. And certainly for the folks watching, if you have any questions about, healthcare, about St. Joseph Hospital, and how we treat and work with the LGBTQ community, please feel free to reach out to us. Reach out to Rosemary here. She's a wonderful resource. And certainly, if you'd be interested in joining the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee here at St. Joe's, like Rosemary said, we do take members of the community. So please reach out to Rosemary as well. And we will certainly post her email contact in the link below. So thank you again. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Rosemary. And thank you, everyone, for watching.
Happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride, guys.